Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Cyberpunk Uncensored, and I am Rob Mulligan. Today's episode is all about cyberpsychosis. But before we get into that, let me introduce my guest today. I got my buddy Hugo here. What's up, man?
How's it going?
Good, good. I'm glad you could join me. I know we've tried to kind of connect on the live stream and on the podcast and things, and it just, we've always been kind of busy at different times or whatever, but I'm glad we were able to work it out today.
Yeah, no problem. I'm on the. I think the problem is I'm on Pacific, and I think you're on East Coast time.
No, no, no. I'm in LA. I'm on.
Are you?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh shoot. Okay. Oh well, then I don't have no idea why we haven't been able to sync up.
All right. Well, no fucking excuses then. What the hell happened there? No, but yeah. So check it out. What I'd like to do before we start talking about cyberpsychosis is give a little background on you. Talk about your history of gaming and what you're into, and being into cyberpunk and stuff. Because I know we met online through the cyberpunk groups, and then obviously when I started kind of getting cyberpunk uncensored going, you came in there and you were very supportive, just like a lot of other people in the community, and you quickly became a moderator and kind of just help content flowing and interacting and stuff. And I know you run your own group too, but that's how I met you, is online. But I'd love to hear more about you and your background and all that, and I'm sure the listeners would too. So fill me in.
All right. Well, real simply, I am probably what most people would consider an OG pen and paper tabletop RPG player. I started playing way back in the '90s. Um, During the golden age of tabletop RPGs, and like probably 99% of most people out there, it was Dungeons and Dragons mostly. Me and a bunch of high school friends used to, the typical, you spend all Saturday playing Dungeons and Dragons and all that bit. We played a couple of other alternate systems. Sadly enough, I didn't even know what Cyberpunk 2020 was back in those days. That was not anything that we didn't even know that existed when we were playing. It was all Dungeons and Dragons. And then I think, like most people, I grew up. I went to college, and then I became an adult, and it kind of went to the wayside. And then, like about 10 years ago, I kind of got bored with things and thinking about, like, old hobbies and old interests that I used to have, and like I really just enjoyed playing the game and all that bit. And so I just picked it back up again. I just started playing a game, and one thing led to another, and now I've GM'd games. I've been in so many different groups. In terms of cyberpunk, however, I actually came to it from a very weird angle because I'm a huge sci-fi and fantasy reader. So I knew about cyberpunk before anyone else, before it was a thing, really. So I read like William Gibson and Neil Stevenson, and I saw Akira and Ghost in the Shell and all that stuff long before anyone even really thought about it. And so I really got into this like through cyberpunk, and then I found a video about Mike Pondsmith and him talking about Cyberpunk 2020, and I said, "Whoa, wait! There was a tabletop RPG for Cyberpunk?" And bought the core rulebook, read it, ran a few games, been in a few games, and slowly but surely they announced the 2077 game, and slowly but surely I've just been involved in more and more activity. I got invited to be a moderator to the Facebook group, and then I got invited to the Discord server, and then I met you, and then we started the Cyberpunk Uncensored thing, or you did, and invited me along, and here I am.
Hell yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I think a lot of people back in the day, one thing to remind everybody, like any maybe younger listeners, is, back in the day there wasn't social networking sites, and you didn't hear about everything all the time. I feel like now it's so easy to hear about every fucking game and thing going on in TV show and movie, and like you just see so many ads and people talking about stuff and sharing, and just it's just an overload of things, and you can pick and choose what you want to be into. But back in the day, the only way you would hear about new game systems or, events or things to do is if it was big enough to afford like a big commercial or billboard, which would be extremely rare in the role-playing tabletop world, but you'd have to be at the game shop or in your school, or like you said, in college, like with buddies or, friends, or it was, not as accessible as now, especially with the digital age. Look at Roll20 and all the sites and how easy it is to just meet new people, like how we met. So yeah.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah, like for the most part, it was Dungeons and Dragons because that was the most popular, like
Oh yeah.
commonly available item. Like you go to the store and you could have the smorgasbord of whatever adventures you want, and like we were starving for other content, so like we like picked up the Marvel superhero RPG and we picked up the Star Wars RPG, and but it was like never enough of that content to be able to switch over completely, and
Yeah.
like for example, like I'd be completely honest with you, like when I came back to it 10 years ago, it was mostly digital. Like I quickly jumped on Roll 20 and I bought books through Drive Through RPG, and if it wasn't for any of that, like I probably would have never bought most of the cyberpunk books.
Yeah.
I think it's actually kind of hard to find the hardcover editions of the cyberpunk book by and
Y-
large, unless you're getting like a reprint.
Yeah, I've got my original collection still of all my D&D stuff. Dungeons and Dragons. That's the Godfather role playing game. So yeah, that was the big one back in the day, and I think that's where a lot of people got their start. I started on second edition AD&D. But it was like I have all those physical books, but I had did a previous episode where I mentioned the pandemic and the quarantine. It kind of forced me to look online, and that's like the only good thing for me that came out of this damn quarantine is like I got online a little bit more with that side of things because all my personal gaming stopped. We weren't getting together anymore with friends and stuff. So when I looked online, I found Roll20. I found these groups. I heard about the new Cyberpunk Red coming, the video game. I was like, oh my god, like let me dive back into this shit, and I just like dove back in. Now I'm just like neck deep loving it, because I'm doing the live game streams, the GM tips, the Cyberpunk Uncensored videos from the podcast, this podcast. I'm starting the GM Roundtable. We're starting to stream other GMs underneath the brand and kind of make this little community. Like you see, we're kind of starting on Discord. So, yeah, that's the only good thing that came out of the quarantine, I guess, is it showed me all this stuff that I probably wouldn't have noticed or paid attention to with everything else I was doing in life. But
Oh man, I am like a preacher. I keep like prophesizing and like selling it to everyone. Like
oh yeah,
I like, and I grew up in the pen and paper. Like I grew up writing pages of character
me
sheets and
too.
reading. But when hopped online and realized, oh shoot, there's a database, I could just drag and drop items and it does the calculations for me, and I don't have to worry about lining up my character sheets anymore and all this other bit, and you could just play and not worry about all that minutia. I think it's very transformative, and I actually think like we would probably if tabletop RPGs would probably be more popular if people invested more into digital online tools and making the crunch less crunchy. You
Yeah,
understand what I'm
yeah.
saying?
Oh no,
And
totally. Yeah, because I also feel like the other side to that that's amazing is just think of how easy it is to meet new people, new players, and new GMs from around the world. Like you don't just have to look in your local area. Like you can hop online and like just set a time of the day or week or month or however often you want to play. But I think it's just the internet has obviously it's just opened up the world to this a bigger community, and I think it's like you said, I'm trying to I don't know, be a soapbox or sound off about this as much as I can in multiple different ways because I love cyberpunk. I have a passion for it, and I just want to see it grow and grow and just see how big it can get because I'm really excited about it. But
oh yeah.
it's also got that nostalgic thing for me too because I was playing back when I was a kid. So with 2020. So I'm also like I don't know if it's like a midlife crisis thing or what you want to call it, but it's like really fun and it feels nostalgic when I get into it and we stream the games and we play and I'm reading the books. You know what I mean?
Oh no, absolutely, yeah, and I totally get that because, like I said, I grew up in that traditional pen and paper world where we all sat together with the Mountain Dew and the Doritos, and you stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning because it was the only excuse you could get to stay up late, and and
Yeah,
and and all that bit, and all that. But at the same time, like I'm very cognizant of the fact that like I was a very bookwormy, nerdy kind of guy who like didn't mind memorizing rules and writing down formulas and all that bit, and I'm very aware of the fact that there's a lot of people who are not into that crunch. Like they're just that doesn't motivate them. They
sure.
want to play a story. They want to play a character. They want to act out a scene. And I think that's actually the more important part of tabletop RPGs. Like the crunch is the crunch, and there's a skill and things you can learn from that. But I think
Yeah.
the real core of it is like the people being together, collaborating, ad-libbing a story, using your imagination,
Oh
being
yeah.
creative.
No, and,
I
and with Roll20 and these sites, it like, eases a lot of that crunch. Like you said, it automates some of those things, but it still keeps the world and the decision making and everything else open world, a huge sandbox. It's like there's no limitations like a video game, like even an open world video game, which is amazing. Like I'm looking forward to 2077, but even a video game is going to have certain limitations. They're going to have an edge of the map. You know what I mean? And so like
absolutely.
and that's the one cool thing is like even with Roll20 and digitizing the tabletop role playing game, it still is like, you're still talking and using the mind's eye or looking at a map, and it's still an open world and you can do anything and say anything. But I love, like you said, how these sites have kind of taken some of that crunch away. So certain things move a little smoother and faster. Yeah, I don't know. It just makes the story and everything just more epic and more movie like, and you can picture it more when you're not trying to think too much about the math with the players, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I've been a big proponent of that, and I get that there's a huge technophobic streak to the medium. Like a lot of guys are just married to that old school. Like I want the binder with the books and the
Oh,
DM
yeah.
screen, but at the same time, I kind of feel like, well, yeah, but that was even that was an evolution because no one remembers that Gary Gygax was adapting like old school wargaming scenarios where like stuffy guys in like suits used to argue about like military strategy, and he
Yeah.
took that and made it to a game with fantasy and elves, and people looked at him like, "What are you doing?"
No, totally. And I think like one thing to say is like I was definitely kind of one of those people when I was getting into the digital. I saw everything going on. I was apprehensive of using a site like Roll20 at first because I was like, oh, I don't want to have to learn this whole interface and how to do all these things in there. It's I don't want to have to learn it all. And so I was like video chatting either through Zoom or Facebook, and still getting online and getting back into playing with friends that we couldn't meet in person because of the quarantine. But then I was like, I finally was like, fuck, let me get on there. And I got into Roll20 and I was like, wow, okay, it's really not that difficult. You're just like loading in a map, you're setting the details, and you do the little tutorial and it walks you through, and it's like, it's like, it does a lot of cool stuff, but it's super simple and it's free. That's what I love about Roll20.net, anyways. As if this is a
No,
commercial for that, but I
no,
love it.
absolutely. And the sad thing is like I've worked in tech, like I've worked in IT, I've been in customer service, I've worked with
Yeah,
software programmers, and so I look at Roll20 and I'm like, wow, this is an amazing tool, and this should be something that definitely everyone should look into. But I also look at it like, wow, they put minimal amount of investment in this. Like this is a bare bones product, and
yeah.
like so much more could be done to make it more user friendly, more intuitive, more easier to wrangle, and I think that that's really, to me, it breaks my heart because I think if a tool like that was built, like if there was a killer app experience for like tabletop RPGs where a bunch of people could just get together, drag and drop a couple of character sheets, throw up a simple map, and just play like you could back in the old days, but
Yeah.
just completely online, so much more people would be jumping into the genre.
Oh, big time. Hell yeah. Most definitely. But yeah, so enough about all that stuff.
Enough of that. So let's get
Cause,
into
cause I, yeah,
why. Let's get into that. Why this is such a great medium to play into because of cyberpsychosis.
no, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to, I could talk about cyberpunk all fucking day, and we can keep going on tangents. But yeah, exactly. Let's talk about cyberpsychosis. I think it's such an interesting subject because from a GM point of view and a player point of view, implementing this is very, I don't know, interpretive or whatever. Like it's not so defined in the books. I mean, it's defined how you get it in levels, but there's never like you have to do this, you have to do that, you roll this and you get this negative. There's no, it's very weird. But let's back up a little. Why don't you get into take the mic here and explain to people listening, what empathy points are, how it adds up to your humanity, and then how that affects when you get cybernetics, the leading to cyberpsychosis. Kind of explain those details.
Absolutely, and this is based on the Interlock Cyberpunk 2020 rules.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think you have the beta rules. I don't know if it covers if cyberpsychosis is different in that versus the
Yeah,
old school
exactly.
rules.
Well, that's what I figured. Is you explain it as 2020 is, and the details. It's very very similar. There's just a couple tweaks when it comes to red, but I would like to just go over all the details that you got for, general public speaking, and then I'll kind of interject some stuff when we get going.
No problem. All right, so real simply, in Interlock, there's two scores. One is your empathy score, which is just generally a stat score that covers like basically how you can read human emotions and deal with people. And uh, the mechanic says you take that score, you multiply it by 10, and that gives you your humanity score. And your humanity score is the pool of available points you have for how much cybernetics you can install on your body. And so, as the rules work, every piece of cybernetic has what's called a humanity cost. It's usually either a straight negative cost, or you roll depending on the dice, 1d6, 1d4, whatever. Um, you install the part, you roll the dice, it tells you how much you lose in humanity, and you subtract it from your total score. Now, this is where it gets interesting. For every 10 points of humanity that you lose 1 point of your empathy stat. Why is that important? Because once you reach empathy 3, your personality starts changing. And then according to the game rules, at empathy 3, you're basically cold hearted fish. You don't care about much of anything at all. Most things don't move you, and you're generally a heartless person. At empathy 2, you're basically emotionless and unpleasant to be around, as a description. At empathy 1, it says that you fight violent urge to hurt people around you. And so the idea is at this point that people are so irrelevant to you that you just like you have to fight the urge of just crushing someone's head because they're in your way. And then at empathy 0 is the what is considered cyberpsychosis. You have an intense hatred of all biological life around you, and you will ruthlessly kill and murder anyone in your way. In the game rules, basically at empathy 0, the GM takes over your character, and either you have to be captured and treated or killed.
Yep. No, exactly. And I think just some things to add here as far as Red and how things have kind of evolved. And I love what they do with Red because they expand on things that you want. They kind of pull back on things that maybe got too crunchy or extensive in previous versions. Like it's I love what they've done here with streamlining and then expanding parts. But when it comes to cyberpsychosis, they kind of give you this sort of checklist of you know uh, traits, and I can't read exactly. I don't want to get into any details, but they give you basically this checklist of psycho things. Like whether it's you lack empathy, or you lack guilt, or maybe you have to have some type of stimulation, or impulsivity or whatever. So it has all these things, and then as you go, whether it's empathy, like it's the same. Like once you get to 3, it kind of starts. When you get down to 2, then 1, then 0. And same thing. I think 0, it's just absolutely crazy. You're either captured for rehabilitation or killed or whatever. The GM's taken over. You don't let it get that far. But anyways, as you're going through 3, 2, 1, and such, it kind of tells you, you don't have cyberpsychosis yet, but you're getting a little bit crazy. With 2, you're getting crazy, and you got to do your best to kind of act that way. And then when you get down to 1, same thing, but you got to at least grab some of the traits from the list there, and you got to add those in and kind of role play accordingly. When you get down to 0, you're even grabbing more, and that's when the GM is kind of like, I feel, can get some more creative freedom, like you said. But it just gives at least a little bit more detail in that because you're grabbing things from a checklist, and I feel that helps encourage the player to kind of fall in line or whatever, because they've brought their character all the way to that point. But I think it's interesting to kind of discuss from a GM point of view how sometimes that can be difficult. A player sometimes can, get crazy with all the cybernetics and get fully into that. And then, they won't change the way that they're playing so much. They're still just continuing on and, trying to ignore that fact, I guess. Like in the past, anyways, I feel with Red, they go into detail with treatments and all kinds of stuff, and the med tech's abilities, and it's definitely more involved, which I enjoy, which I think is awesome because it kind of forces some of that stuff. But how as a GM, do you kind of deal with cyberpsychosis? And feel free to go on tangents about it and stuff. Just give me your thoughts on all that.
Well, yeah, it's like you said. I think the big problem with this is, I mean, personally thinking me and reading the rules, I kind of feel this was a blank spot that was supposed to be another supplement at some point in the future that they were going to cover. Um, Specifically, I kind of feel like if they were ever going to make a med tech supplement, it probably would have covered cyberpsychosis more in depth, like how to treat it, what are the conditions, what are the alternatives to it. Because, yeah, you read the rules, it doesn't give you a lot to work with. It's very open to interpretation. Munchkins are going to munchkin.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, there you're gonna find a guy who wants to be basically RoboCop but doesn't want to play RoboCop, and it's like, dude, like, do you understand how the rules work? And they're like, well, no. And so I understand. This is where I understand some GMs love. This is why they love crunch, because then there's no argument. Like the table says you have to roll, and that's it. You know,
Right.
it's a lot harder for you to have a more thematic conversation with a player unless you have that relationship with someone to say, okay, well, how do you think someone losing their mind would react?
Exactly.
You understand what I'm saying?
That's a great point to make, because that's kind of how I would have to handle it in gameplay. And I haven't really run across this as a GM so much. Back in the day, I did. Me and my friend and group, we would kind of trade off who's GMing. We do extensive campaigns and trade. This is before I moved away when I was a kid. But it's like you have to do one of two things. Like you're either playing, you're GMing. A player goes so far into cybernetics, they really shouldn't be acting like the normal character, yet they continue on acting like nothing's wrong. You either have to do one of two things. You either address it in gameplay and you find a tactful way to do it, whether it's, you taking over certain things. I love how you just put it. I think it's a great tip for GMs out there if you're listening. It's kind of good just to kind of say, well, wait a minute. How would someone that's kind of crazy and in the depth of some cyberpsychosis handle a situation like that? And it kind of makes them, it's not like forcing them, it's not telling them to do something, but it's asking them, and it kind of forces them to think about it, at least. And hopefully at that point, they'll play honestly. You know what I mean? But the only other way is to just kind of tolerate it, keep moving forward. Everyone's having fun, whatever. Maybe no one else noticed. You as a GM noticed that they're not, acting accordingly or falling in line with what they've brought their character to in cyberpsychosis. Wait till the game's over, and then if you're all friends with the group, you're friends with everybody playing, you just kind of talk to them separately, away from everyone. Like, hey man, like, just so you know, you're to this point, and this is how really that person should be acting. You should be a little bit crazier and stuff, unless you plan on getting some therapy or doing something about it. This is what you kind of got to be doing. So just keep that in mind from now on, and I'll remind you in gameplay if you forget. And you can take it that way too. But I really like kind of nipping it in the bud and just confronting it in gameplay. I think that was a great point that you made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of it is like, at least in my experience, and like you, I've never had too much of an experience in cyberpsychosis. I think most people have a healthy. I think the
They
I think
avoid it.
to avoid it, because the rules specifically say, like, once you get to zero, the GM takes over your character and it's basically up to them what your fate is. And I think most players don't like that
Yeah.
idea. So I think most, okay, well, I know that this empathy 3 is the line and I'm not going to cross it. But you have the ones who are like, well, technically I can still be, empathy 1 and still be playing, you
Right.
know and then that's when you get to, yeah, dude, but then literally, like, every RP situation, it's like you got to be making cool saves to make sure you're not just going to kill everybody
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know
yeah. No, that's a great point too. Like make them start doing cool saves. Set your different, DV levels. Set your whatever you're to hit or whatever you want to call it, depending on what you're playing here. But if they're starting to get close to there, maybe just set that as a cool check, and that could be used as kind of a reminder for them to take on some of those personality traits too.
That's why I actually, when I read all this, and I was like, well, this is all interesting, but I actually was already like, this needs to be expanded upon, and there needs to be a little bit more options, or more, I guess, tools in your toolkit to give a player to say, okay, think of it this way or think of it that way. Because in reality, it's like, well, let me get this straight. Just because I happen to add a cybernetic eye, I now want to, like, ruthlessly kill every human being in front of me. That makes no sense.
Right.
uh, and I get that kind of thematic thing of,
Well, I
like,
like
well,
that there's layers to it though. It's not necessarily like that unless they're going so far down to like 0 or 1 or negative empathies. It drops to the point the GM's taken over, or they're down on 1 or 0 and they're borderline or whatever. But I think that's kind of cool with Red, that within 3, 2, 1, they give these kind of little personality traits, and you can kind of remind the player to, hey, implement these into your character's actions and thoughts and stuff. Like, you should be thinking like this. And you just got to remind them. But I do like that cool check idea. I think that's another way, or like, an empathy
see,
check maybe. So like their empathy, as it goes down, like it's harder and harder for them to make those checks. and if they don't make them, then maybe the GM says, yeah, you're gonna have to swing on them. You're gonna have to do something violent right here. You know what I mean? Like, or whatever it might be, whatever the situation might call for. Like,
No,
if
absolutely.
yeah,
But I mean, even before I even knew how Red was going to
yeah,
approach
yeah,
cyberpsychosis, even I was thinking about it like, well, yeah, the simplest solution is say, well, yeah, you put too much, you become Darth Vader, twisted and evil, and you're more machine than
right,
man. I get the concept, but I'm like, there should be at least some variety, and I always felt like it could be anything. Like cyberpsychosis could be you become a psychopathic killer, or it could be you get some weird version of like Parkinson's disease, or like you have
right.
dissociative disorder, or
Well, one thing that I did back in the day when I would actually do it, and like the one time I would run across it, and because everyone would always try to avoid it, and they would avoid getting even to three. They would go as far as four, but no one would hit three because no one wanted to see what would happen or how they would have to try to change. But in the occasion that it did, and I would do things like start a session maybe where that player and it would kind of put the session around him, which would maybe make the other players have to react because that's how it would be if someone in your party was cyberpsychosis. But they show up not remembering what they did last night, and there's a scream sheet report like his description and wanted on the news. Somebody's looking for him,
perfect,
a
yeah,
murder, and you throw them into a sticky
exactly
a
like that.
sticky situation. So maybe it's like, okay, you're acting normal, you can still play your character, but I'm gonna drop some big bombs on here where there's moments where you black out and you don't know what the fuck just happened until you fix this issue.
And yeah, and then all of a sudden, and all of a sudden, the next day, someone's out to kill you, and you're
Right,
like,
right,
wait, like what happened? Oh, you just killed my best friend last night. What do you mean?
exactly. No,
So yeah,
I
so
think you
so
have to kind
definitely.
of you kind of have to force it as a GM. It's not going to be typically it's not going to be something that a player is going to just really take on. Most players are going to avoid it. Like I said, they're going to avoid getting even down to three. But I think the fact that like Red gets into some detail about med techs and therapies and costs and all kinds of cool shit, to where I think it's a little more defined and people are going to cross that line because then they're going to try to deal with rolling and getting therapy and paying and these things to fix at least it to certain degrees. And that's going to be kind of fun because it's going to be a little bit different, but hopefully players have fun with it, and GMs get creative with it. I think if you can't address it in game or after and they're still not doing it, get creative. Like I said, drop in a blackout moment, take out chunks of their time where all of a sudden there's repercussions and things happening and they have no clue why or what happened, and they've got to figure that out, and all of a sudden it becomes part of the game and maybe a little annoying at times to them in the party because maybe things happen in the middle of a session or another job they're doing, like they're all going somewhere and they got to meet and that person isn't there yet, and then you wait just a few minutes, let the game get going, then all of a sudden, okay, cool, now you're walking in, you have no idea why, but you got blood on your hands right now.
Absolutely,
You can do
yeah,
stuff like
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Those are great ways of handling. That's exactly how I would either for a player who doesn't know how to deal with cyberpsychosis, or is just like, well, surprise me with something. I don't really want to know how I get cyberpsychosis, which sounds great on paper, but then it's like, oh, great, now you left it all up to me. Awesome.
Right, right. No, I think like
Uh,
I said, you got it. The GM needs to, put on his GM hat and kind of take control over certain things, but do it in such a way where nobody's railroaded. You're not doing whatever. I think be tactful, like I said, slip in little things to where it's, like I'm doing a whole GM's tip thing in an episode about rewards and repercussions because it's a big part of role playing in my mind, just like you have your motivations to drive the player. But I think it has to come to that point. You got to not railroad, not force it, but you got to force a couple things that are happening in the
well, you got to
background.
nudge it, and you have to set up a circumstance.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really about circumstances, right? Because the truth is, thematically speaking, right? If you're going cyber psychotic, you're not aware of it. It's not like you just woke up
Exactly. No, well,
this morning,
that's why I like to
right?
do the whole blackout thing. That's why I came up with that back in the day because it was like, man, there's a perfect way that in my mind translates to how it would actually be. You'd wake up and be like, why the fuck, am I wearing this, and why is that weapon over there, and like who is that tied up in the corner? What the fuck just happened last night? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's segue into that because there's another aspect to this which is not mechanical, sort of speak. Well, it is, but it's sort of alternate, right? Because in the Cyberpunk 2020 world, a big part of it was apparently there's cyber psychos running around everywhere, right?
Oh yeah.
There's a bunch of people who've always pushed the limit. There's Maelstrom. There's a whole booster gang
Oh,
who
and that's the
basically,
whole
yeah,
reason there's C SWAT and like the Psycho Squad. You know what I mean?
right.
With the police
So
department. I love that
so
shit.
so it's so dangerous and it's so prevalent in cyberpunk that there is an actual psycho squad, whose only job is it to catch people who have gone over the edge and put them down, pretty much. Because I doubt they believe in capturing first.
Oh no, and it's not just like something mentioned in the rule book, and it's a thing that happens with it, and it's the reason for Psycho Squad on the police department or whatever. C SWAT. It's also part of the lore. I forget what it is. It's in like the Night City source book where they talk about at Lake Park. Behind the stage is the famous spot where so and so, who was cyberpsychosis, went on a killing rampage. I forget what year it was, all over there, and that's where C SWAT captured and killed him. I wish I could remember the name. I wish I had that in front of me. I think we mentioned it in the Night City episode of the podcast. So anybody listening, you can go back, check out that episode. We dive into Night City lore. But I love the fact that they incorporate cyberpsychosis directly into the lore. Like it's definitely, like you said, a prevalent part of the culture of cyberpunk, the whole world. It's world, it's part of what happens. There's definitely going to be, just like now, we have people that abuse drugs and go overboard with things, or they're addicted to collecting things or weird stuff. I don't know, whatever. But it's like that. Like, think of how the dark future would be. People would totally be addicted to getting cybernetics and just losing themselves in the dark, cold future, and maybe losing empathy and humanity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so in that way, the obvious question is this a zero sum game? Once you reach zero, is there no coming back from that brink? Obviously not. There are ways to come back from the brink of I guess psychosis.
No, there's definitely you can definitely come back. At least in red, it defines, like I said, therapies and things you can do. You can never fully go back to your empathy, because just having cybernetics comes with a cost. But you can repair it to the point to get you back. It's going to be at a cost. It's going to be time. It's going to be money, depending on if you know a med tech or you're paying for therapy or hospital or whatever the case may be and what level you're at. But you can fix yourself, just like in real world. You can go to therapy and things like that. But the one.
However, it's a very, I mean, it's a serious trade off, because at least in the 2020 lore and interlock, the only way to come back is you'd have to get rid of all your cybernetics, go into intense therapy, and in theory you can restore your empathy score. But like you said, you could never, like the minute you start wearing cybernetics, you'd start losing your humanity
Yeah.
again. So,
Well, no, yeah.
you
Let
know,
me let me add. In red, it's very rare. Don't get me wrong. If it depends on what level you're at. But if you get all the way down to like zero and negative humanity, and you're to the point that the GM's taken over, yeah, you're being hunted by Psycho Squad. Usually you're being killed. It's time to make a new character. You went too far. But there is rehabilitation. It's just rare, but it's there. Like I said, it depends on the GM and how maybe how the player handles it. But the one thing I really wanted to mention, I didn't mention at the beginning, and I wish I did, is with red. The other kind of cool thing, and we were talking about this in the game that I run, is the fact that you can also lose humanity based on like different traumas. It's not just cybernetics. So like, depending on if you're tortured or kidnapped or maybe
oh,
trapped.
so they expanded it beyond just
Oh yeah.
cyberware. It's like if you get tortured, you might lose some humanity
Oh
points.
yeah, yeah, like traumatic mental stress and shit, long environmental stress factors like being trapped in the war zone or different crazy shit. Like you can literally have humanity lost from things. So it's kind of fun to do that too, because you can look at a life path and come up with stuff, or you can implement it into the game, which is kind of cool. Like if a player's getting out of hand, you can do certain things and be like, boom, now you're actually losing humanity because you did this and it's stressful, or you're doing, you know what I mean? Or like if they fail on certain things and have to go through some torture or kidnapping or war zone stuff or whatever, maybe it stresses them out and you can hit them with some humanity loss, and it just adds a whole nother layer of danger and craziness to the world. And I love that they did that with red.
No, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Did you ever do you know about the Scandinavian cyber clinics?
No, what's up?
So in Cyberpunk 2020, in the supplement, in the Eurosource supplement, there is an alternative to the traditional therapy cyber psychologist option.
Uh
Um, you can, with the right, obviously, with enough money, basically go to the Betty Ford clinic of cyber clinics.
oh. Nice.
And so basically, according to this, you must book 6 months in advance. It's at an extra 10% cost of the standard rate, and it will. Oh no! For extra 10% of the standard cost, they can boost you 1d6 months up the waiting list. Now, maybe you can understand this because I'll have to read this rule a couple times to understand what this means. Because it says roll humanity twice, subtract the second result from the first to get the actual humanity cost. And I'm like, what humanity? So I'm wondering if that means just roll 2d10 and subtract the two numbers because that doesn't make sense what it says.
Yeah, I'd
And
have to read that and really
yeah,
look at it.
and so basically it says the course lasts 1 day per maximum humanity cost, which is what that formula calculates,
Yeah.
and it costs 1000 EB a day plus normal operation costs.
Wow.
And so that is probably the quickest way for you to cure yourself, at least in the interlock 2020 rules, to cure yourself of cyberpsychosis in the game. I can imagine that if you were this bad that you would opt for this would be quite an expensive therapy course.
Oh yeah. At least it's there though. Like I love when they do stuff like that. It's very real, and it's like, man, if you have the fucking money, you can be healthier. You can take care of things like that. So whether you're stealing it or a life of crime or trying to get to that point, or you're just lucky enough to be a high level rocker boy or corp exec with the money, you can go handle it. But it's like in Red, I'm sure when it comes out and all the other lore comes. Because keep in mind, I only have like kind of the core rules in beta version, enough to play, but it doesn't come with all the fancy lore and extras and goodies. Like there's definitely a lot of references in the book where it's like, it'll tell you the rule and it'll say, but this is all expanded on page, and then it says XXX, and you're like, damn it, you know what I mean? So like, there's definitely a lot missing from lore. So I'm excited to see what they do with it, but I'm sure there's gonna be like, they mentioned the different clinics and costs depending on how much humanity you're trying to gain back through therapies. I mean, we at least have that in the core, like it explains some of those details. But I'd be excited to see if there is also some type of like you just described, some higher level Betty Ford version. Like you gotta be famous or rich as fuck to be able to afford that and get to it, and then you get, I don't know, a little better treatment options, and like I don't know, that'd be kind of cool.
No, absolutely. I mean, I when I read this portion of the rules, I was like, wow, there's so many adventures can just come, not just from dealing with people who have cyberpsychosis, right? So like, you can imagine you could play Psycho Squad. I'm running a Psycho Squad game. It
Nice.
it runs it creates its own adventures right there. Like you don't even, like 75% of the work's done for you. You know,
Yeah.
um, and like for example, like my main game that I played with my group literally revolved around cyberpsychosis. It was literally two corporations desperately trying to find a way to circumvent this humanity loss, and what they were willing to do it,
That's
like
fun.
to make it happen. And like, one corporation was trying to do it the right way, and one corporation was like, I don't care, human guinea pigs, and if we're gonna pile bodies to solve this problem,
Yeah.
so be it, because the profits are there. And yeah, and so yeah, it was a pivotal part of the entire story. Basically, the background was really simple, right? So there were two corporations. One was like the nice corporation, or the one that was trying to do nice the nice way, ethical, and there was one corporation that was completely heartless, cold. And so they were both trying to research a way, could you do a full body replacement without someone going cyber psycho, right?
Yeah.
And so the one company decided they were going to use medical nanobots. That was their gimmick,
Nice.
but they couldn't make it work. That was my story part. For whatever reason, they could just never make it work.
Yeah.
It's like that scene in RoboCop 2 when they kept trying to make another RoboCop,
Yeah.
and it just had a whole list of just failures, and they're just sitting there like, what? Why can't we replicate this? And
Yeah.
so I was like, it's the same thing. The nanobots don't adhere properly. They dismantle the whole body. The guy goes crazy, and it just becomes this big monster, and they just can't figure out how to do it. The
Yeah.
other company is like, well, we're not going to worry about the hardware part, because the real problem is it's your mindset, it's your attitude, it's your perception of what's happening to you while you're undergoing this that's really causing the trauma. So they figured out some sort of psychological brain dance, neural way of doing it. But they were a really small company. They couldn't do widespread testing.
Uh,
So in the background, I had it so that the bigger company heard about this. So they go, hey, why don't we join forces and join our research and see if we can make a better product together? So they do that on the pretext of just looking at the technology. They see it and they go, yeah, this is what we need. But we're not going to share profits with these assholes. So
nice.
they fake a corporate espionage incident and steal the tech from them, and then tell them like, "Oh, everything's gone. The laboratory's destroyed. Like we're back to square one. Sorry about that." And of course, the other corporation's like, "Bullshit. We know what you did."
Yeah.
And then the whole story revolved around that. And yeah, it was a very fascinating concept. I basically had it so that what was essentially happening was the nanobots, every time they would interface with someone's mind, your mind would try to take over the nanobots and there would be like a struggle. And because of that, you know, that conflict would basically kill most people, and though either the nanobots won or you won. Either which way, the outcome was not good. In the story, it was so bad it almost created what's called a gray goo apocalypse. I don't know if you know what that means.
Nice. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's when nanobots get so out of control they start trying to eat the entire planet.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's how bad it got. And of course, in the game, technically speaking, the one corporation that was doing this research was actually banned from doing it. It was like a moratorium on nanobot research. But of course, they were like, yeah, we were not going to listen to that either.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they hired a booster gang to kidnap people in the combat zone or in the border of the combat zone and literally use them as human guinea pigs to try to perfect this process.
Nice.
And so the party basically stumbled onto this entire plot because the one main character was a rocker boy, and someone in his fan club, his mom got kidnapped. So of course he writes to his favorite, his favorite celebrity and says, "Can you help me find my mom?" And he moonlights as a vigilante, like a street hero type. So he's like, "Yeah, of course I'll go save your mom," and
Oh yeah.
stumbles into this entire dark conspiracy. And so it culminates basically with them finally being able to make their perfect cyborg. Right? They actually captured one of the retiring players, one of my players who didn't want to play anymore. And so I was like, okay, fine. Can I use your character in the story? He's like, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Oh yeah.
So I had him captured, and then finally he was like, the doctor who was researching this. I made him like a Dr. Frankenstein type. So he's like, I finally found my perfect specimen, because the player actually wanted to be a full body cyborg, and he kind of played his character like a cyberpsychotic, like heartless and like
Nice.
devoid of emotion. So I was like, this would be perfect. Like this doctor sees him, is like, oh, I don't have to prep this guy. He wants to be a cyborg,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so yeah, and so the final scene the final scene of the campaign was the corporation basically prototyping the cyborg by cleaning up loose ends and killing the booster gang that they had been doing business with to cover up all their nefarious deeds, while the party was trying to like rescue the person's mom and all these other victims of human trafficking.
Nice. No, I love that, and I love that you built the campaign around cyberpsychosis. That's fun. I also love like when like I've seen other games where they'll actually make a party be something unique. Like they'll have like the whole party. I forget, it was Caitlin, I think, in our Cyberpunk Uncensored group online, was talking about her next campaign where all of them are playing execs, corps that were they all just recently got laid off or something, or they're ex execs, and now they're all on the streets struggling together or something along those lines. I also know somebody that did a whole campaign where everybody was a cop, a different type of cop at a station. So like, I think that's kind of fun too. Like, not just making a story and a campaign based around some great elaborate
Oh,
thing.
like I
Like,
said, it writes itself. Like you could do anything. You could literally be like, "Oh, some mad scientist created a chip that offsets humanity loss
right.
during cyber surgery, and now five corporations are trying to hunt it down, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it."
Yeah, yeah. No, but even aside from like implementing cyberpsychosis into, plot and story campaign, I think another interesting angle would be get a party together that wants to play characters like that and go a little overboard with the cybernetics and make everyone play that type of character, something the same way like others have done like a full corp exec team or a full cop team. You know what I mean? Like that would be kind of crazy to do a
I mean,
whole team
technically,
of cyber.
technically speaking, you could play members of the Maelstrom. Like we're a
Yeah,
Maelstrom
it's
gang.
true. That's so true. Yeah, yeah. So that will be.
I mean, yeah. If there's any genre or setting where playing the quote unquote evil campaign allowed and encouraged, it's cyberpunk. I mean,
Well, I mean, hell, I did a whole Game Master Tips episode on the YouTube channel about making it cyberpunk, and man, one of the things is like, I mean, just the world itself being dangerous all the time and corrupt because of the struggle and the income diversity. It's just it's already has that layer there, which is kind of, I don't know, exciting in itself for a game. Like you said, it's almost set up to be where, like, even when you're a good person, you're gonna come across some bad traits and things
that's the cru-
you're gonna have to do just to survive.
that's the crux of the whole. To me, that's the crux of cyberpunk, right? Because
Oh yeah.
anyone could play a hero, but it's harder to play a hero who has to make a compromised choice, and not like a black and white. It's like a two shades of gray choice now. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh
So
yeah.
it's like, yeah, I want to be a nice person. I don't want to hurt anybody, but now I have the choice of like, okay, I either kill 50 of these people or kill 20 of those people.
Right. It's almost
And
like there's less like right and wrong, and there's just a multitude of lesser evils that you have to figure out. You know what I mean?
exactly, yeah. And so it's fun to play in that boundary. You know what I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
saying?
Totally. 100%. Yeah. No, I
And I
think.
think cyberpsychosis actually is a big part of that. It's sort of like a. I always feel also a big part of cyberpunk is kind of like, be careful what you ask for. You may just get it, and nothing comes for free. There's a price for everything.
Oh yeah, no, 100%, 100%. But definitely with when it comes to cyber psychosis, I definitely have to say, like, a couple things. I love that it's there. I love that they came up with that for the game, the genre, the cyberpunk RPG. I think that it makes sense. It's exciting. It's cool. It's dangerous. It keeps people from going too far. It's almost like a little I don't know, like boundary or whatever to kind of help keep things from getting too unbalanced or whatever, and breaking the game with players that go too far, you know. But what I really love is what they did with Red. Like I said, just defining it a bit more, giving it some boundaries, some set traits and things you can look for, that players can kind of play into. It just defines it more, and then it also defines, like I said, the therapy more and the options and how a med tech can be involved. And it's just I don't know. I feel like they left no stone unturned when it comes to Red. They trimmed back, like I said, some of the crunchy and some of the stuff that maybe was a bit much, and they streamlined that. But then they expanded on stuff like this, like cyberpsychosis, to just make it so much better and just more defined to where it actually makes sense now, and it can be played properly. You know what I mean?
Good. No, that's great because, like I said, this was one of those things where, like, wow, this is an amazing concept. But I could tell, like, reading from the core rule book, that they were like, this is just a sample of what we're thinking about.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
So, on that case, while Cyberpunk Red, it will probably be a great source of mining for ideas of this. I
Yeah,
always feel it's better to say, okay, well, what would be a perfect example of a cyber psychotic, right? Because I mean, let's put it this way, right? The first trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 was basically a cyber psychotic. Like that chick with
right,
the manta blades, she's cyber psycho. That was a cyber psycho. That was a psycho squad guy ready to put a bullet in her head. Like, you know what I'm
right.
saying? So that's what I'm saying. It's so key to Cyberpunk. Like, it's actually was part of the trailer. Um, I was ashamed to say that, like, I'm not completely brought up to the lore of Cyberpunk, so there's a few gaps. So I never bothered to read the events of Firestorm, right?
Yeah,
And now recently I started while listening to it. Obviously, the video game's coming out soon, and it, from my point of view, it seems Cyberpunk 2077 is a sequel to Firestorm. Like, from all intents and purposes, that's what it feels like to me. Um,
nice.
uh, and so, yeah, they start talking about Atom Smasher. And I'm listening to this guy and I see the video and I'm like, holy shoot, that's a cyber psycho.
Yeah,
And I'm like, if you read this guy's background and you hear the story of this guy, he is like, if I'm pretty sure if Mike Ponspic was thinking about what would a cyber psycho look like, it was Atom Smasher. And so yeah, I don't know if you know much about his background, but he's a pretty crazy dude. Apparently, he was a street kid who obviously grew up on the mean streets of wherever, joined the army, apparently was so mean and so bad that he was kicked out of the army for insubordination and excessive force, and became a solo where he specialized in body count. And the story goes that one day he got unlucky. I guess he fumbled a roll somewhere, and he got literally blown apart.
Oh,
And his squad picked up the pieces, brought him back, and Arasaka, hearing about this, collects the body parts and offers him basically makes him an offer he can't refuse.
yeah, become an evil RoboCop.
Basically, yeah, be a cyborg
Yeah,
for us, work for us for 15 years or die.
yeah,
And so as it's described, it is like probably more than likely at this point from Adam Smasher's point of view that wasn't much of a choice anyway. And so he becomes Adam Smasher, this cyborg hitman, the premier solo for the Arasaka
yeah,
Corporation. And so, yeah, he specializes in body count. He prefers to create as much destruction and as much body count. The more innocent people he kills, the better he feels about
yeah.
the
So it's
mission.
definitely, yeah, it's got that cyberpsychosis vibe all over it.
And so this is where the key term of cyberpsychotics comes from: metal over meat. He
Yeah,
would say this to people: metal over meat, because the prevalent attitude of cyberpsychotics is, my technology is superior to all of your squishy parts.
right.
And
No,
so
exactly.
apparently the story goes is that he was basically considered the world's top premier solo mercenary, of course, except for one other person, Morgan Blackhand.
Uh,
And so I imagine the story would go that people would be like, "Oh yeah, that Atom Smasher, he's badass, but he's no Morgan Blackhand. That dude's got style."
yeah, yeah.
you know. And so apparently Atom Smasher was obsessed with dueling Morgan Blackhand.
Eh,
And of course, it didn't help that Morgan Blackhand became an exclusive contractor for Militech. And so the story goes that Morgan Blackhand knew Adam Smasher always wanted to basically prove his theory, whether metal or meat was better, because Morgan Blackhand was not a cyborg.
right.
He was a normal person. And so apparently Morgan Blackhand's reaction to all this was just to avoid Adam Smasher at all costs. I think basically just to taunt
Well,
him, like, yeah, I know you want to answer this question, but I think you're beneath me to even fight. You know
yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying? I think that was what the attitude was. And so the story goes, in the final moments of Shockwave, Firestorm Part 2, Morgan Blackhand and the squads go in to attack Arasaka Tower. Adam Smasher is there to stop them. They set off the nukes that destroy the building, and as they're
yeah.
escaping, Adam Smasher shows up, and him and Morgan Blackhand finally confronts him. And as the tower falls, they fight into the rubble. And no one knows what the
Yeah, yeah.
outcome of the battle is. Although I was thinking about it the other day, and while technically speaking, you see Adam Smasher in Cyberpunk 2077, although I'm still kind of like, is that really Adam Smasher? They could have just fit anybody in a cyborg combat frame, like, and called him Adam Smasher, like,
Right, but
you know, you know what I'm saying? But I actually was thinking about it, and I was like, I think
it's just
Morgan
like
proved his point.
yeah,
I
just
think
like
Morgan.
Johnny Silverhand, I think it's gonna be like that. It's they're
But I was thinking, I'm like, well, if you think about it, I was like, I think, even if Morgan Blackhand died, he won the fight because Adam lost the mission. His mission was to protect Arasaka
oh
Tower.
yeah, no, 100%. He won whether or not he won that combat, he won the war. You know
Right,
what I
and
mean?
and ultimately, I think, like, that's ultimately the
That
real
battle or
lesson.
whatever.
And the sad thing is, I don't even think if it really is Adam Smasher, I'm pretty sure his attitude is like, well, I beat the great Morgan Blackhand, I killed him,
Yeah, yeah.
but not realizing,
Well,
like,
it's all
no,
point
dude.
of view, and that's part of the cyber psychosis. I guess you could chalk it up to at that point. Is like in his mind, he won because that's all he cares about. So that makes sense. You know what I mean?
But in the grander scheme of things,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, dude, you messed up. If you were thinking about the mission and actually being successful,
Right,
fighting
right.
Morgan, fighting Morgan was probably the worst thing to do at that moment.
Oh no, 100%, 100%. You know, like I was saying, he might have lost that combat or that battle, but um, you know, he won the war if you look at it that way, and that does make sense. You know, he didn't preserve the building and take care of that situation. The whole building got taken out. I mean, well, the whole center of the city ultimately
Exactly.
got
Yeah.
fucked, but you know. Um, yeah, no, I think that's a great point to make. I mean, it's just, you know, like we said, it's been incorporated into the lore. It's part of cyberpunk. It just makes sense. Cyberpsychosis is a thing, and it's fun to think of ways to incorporate it into the campaign, into the player creation stuff, how to, you know, utilize it as a GM. We kind of discussed all that. I think we went over all that stuff pretty well. I'm excited for Red to come out so everybody else can see kind of what I'm seeing, and also to see exactly how it ends up and expands, because you know, just because I have the beta rules doesn't mean this is the set in stone version. As they said, until the printed version is in your hand, everything is pretty much beta. You know what I mean? So
No,
I'm excited to see
absolutely.
how that comes out. But it's definitely a really cool aspect to Cyberpunk that I'm glad that they thought of and put in the game. It's really cool.
No, it is, and yeah, it's definitely some interesting concepts to play with. At the same time, though, I'm sure we do have to tell everybody that we're talking about things with mental health issues and stuff like that. Um, so just be a little bit more mindful and respectful of what you do and what people's experiences have been,
Oh yeah.
because a lot of people, for this is not a game or
Well, it's
something.
also that's why it's also great to always have your session zero. Any good GM knows, you know, you do your session zero, and if you don't know the players well enough, you can always discuss that. There's checklists too that you can kind of email everyone and get them to check off on things, and uh, you know, you can kind of research that as a GM. But session zero is always a great place to kind of go over
Absolutely.
some of those things, like, hey, I'm going to incorporate this and that, and you know, or you just straight up ask, like, hey, are there any subjects or things you don't want me to touch on, or anything that I should know about? And you can kind of let them know, or you know, but no, I think that's a great point to make, because it is mental health, and you know, a lot of people do have issues with that. I mean, I don't know anybody, I literally don't know anybody that doesn't have some type of like hang up or mental issue or depression, or you know, some type of quirk to their personality. Everyone is fucking crazy to me, and unique in their own way, and it's great.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. and
nowadays
and
more than ever, with everything going on, it can get a little out of hand, and depression is running amok, and anxiety. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind when doing stuff with cyber psychosis. Make sure everybody can kind of handle the creative things that you're coming up with as a GM. What were you gonna say?
no, absolutely. And just to segue that, like, once again, what I feel like tabletop RPGs brings as an experience is like almost like a group therapy session. You can bring your feelings and attitudes about mental health or your experience, or explore what you've gone through in a way that doesn't strike deep inside of you. You know what I'm saying? A lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
do. A lot of people create characters to explore parts of their life or their attitude or traumas in their past in a way that's more manageable, because it's easier to project yourself onto a character than to talk about your own personal details. You get what I'm saying?
Oh no,
So,
totally. I think
so,
role playing games are you know, it's a form of therapy. It honestly is.
so yeah. So not to say like to scare people off, like, oh no, don't ever talk about this at all.
Right,
But at
right.
the same time, like, just be mindful. Other people have different experiences. Some people might not be comfortable, talking about their personal experiences or wanting to hear about experiences of mental health issues and whatnot, because my grandfather and my uncle dealt with it and it was traumatizing. And you never know what people are dealing with in their personal life. um,
Right.
and yeah, like you said, session zero communication. That's, I always propose that when people talk about GMing or how to GM, what's the best way, I would say talk to your players, get an understanding of how they feel about things, how they
Right.
understand things, how they understand the game, how they
What I
understand the
like to
story,
do,
how they understand what you're doing.
no,
um
exactly. And the other thing too, and that depends on if you're, you know, searching for players to run as a GM. But you know, if you have the luxury of me, where like maybe you are playing with friends or people you've met a little bit deeper than that, and now getting into more online, it's a little more face value. I do discuss it a little bit more if it involves new people. But I always like to kind of start with saying, like, you know, I'm the type of GM, like, I'm gonna play Cyberpunk to its fullest. It's gonna be violent and dangerous and fucked up. I'm gonna cuss. There's gonna be all kinds of content. Anything you've ever seen in the news or can think of, I might throw in there. I'm going to keep it diverse and I'm going to keep it as gritty and dark and fucked up as possible because that's how I picture cyberpunk. And in red, it's even more so. It's even rougher, and I'm going to try to think of ways to make it crazier here and there and stuff. If it ever offends you or things go too far, just let me know. Or if this sounds like it's not something you want to get into, maybe I'm not the right GM, But 9 times out of 10, I think most people when they're getting into cyberpunk, they know that. They know cyberpunk is not, magic potions and you know what I mean, fairies and shit. It's like everybody is pretty much like rough. There's not a lot of fucking nice people. Everything's cutthroat. Everyone's struggling to survive. It's just the dark dystopian future. So I think that it kind of
Yeah,
has.
there's less of that here. However, I do feel though there's the opposite problem with that. Not that there's too many like people with touchy feely or like
Right, right. No,
sensitive.
but you still got to watch out for. You still got
Right.
to protect people.
I feel the I feel the problem though is in the opposite way. You get too many edge lords that gravitate towards these type of genres because all they see is the darkness. All they see is the
That's
fucked up.
true.
All they see is the body count and the crazy shit that they can get away with. So you get into arguments when
Well, yeah,
you're
you don't
just
want murder hobo shit going on
right.
either. That's
So then you
you,
get it
you are right.
right.
That is the opposite side of that. You got to be careful that people don't
And
go
then you
too
get into
crazy.
weird arguments like cyberpunk is not political commentary, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, if you've never picked up a cyberpunk book, they're all political commentaries. It's a
Right.
dystopia. Like, dystopias are political commentaries. That's the fundamental core of the genre. That's the whole reason we're here. Why did it all go wrong, and
Right.
why we shouldn't do this?
No, exactly. But I think that's a great point to make too. Yeah, no, definitely. I think as crazy as it is and as diverse as it should be, and luckily it does kind of have that safety in itself because it is built into the system. It's in the definition. It's the high tech, low life. But I think it's important that even within that, definitely have a session zero. It's you can cover your bases that way, whether it's you explaining to them explaining to you, whether it's coming from GM or player, I'm saying, or if it's just something that you have an open discussion about or ongoing. So like, like I said, maybe you throw anything out there, but you have an open, an open door for communication where it's like, just always let me know if things go too far, let me know, or if things are heading in a certain direction. Cause any good GM, you can change stories, you can change things up and manipulate kind of the plot and what's going on if it's getting a little too fucked up for any particular player because like you said, you never know what someone might have gone through, and then if it's in the game and it just triggers something, and it's you got to watch out for that a little bit. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, and even just to me, I always say like even if you don't want to get into in depth like what kind of stories and whatnot and what plots and just to know like hey, what kind of game do you want to play? Do you want to play a game where you're going to be talking to people and convincing them and it's going to be more about role playing and playing a character and sort of being an actor in a story, or do you want just I want to pull out my gun and tell me how what my chance to hit this guy and put me in the combat zone immediately,
Right.
and that's what I want to play.
Yeah, yeah. No,
You
and
know,
and, and like I said, I got a whole other episode on Game Master Tips about Session Zero. I think, man, that could be its own podcast episode in itself. But taking it back to cyberpsychosis, I think it's important, at least to touch base on that. That was good to bring it up. It is a mental illness, as fun as cyberpsychosis is, and we're glad it's there in the game and it makes sense. And Rudd expanded on it, and it is a cool, part of the system. It definitely is a mental illness in itself. So just remember, as you're playing, that the people playing the characters are still people. So it's important to just watch out for that. Make sure nobody's getting offended or hurt or upset. So, but yeah, I think we talked cyberpsychosis as much as we can. I think we covered all our bases. I think we also gave some good tips and points in here. I'm pretty happy that we went on some tangents about. Was there anything else about cyberpsychosis that you wanted to mention that maybe we forgot?
I don't know. I think, but literally the last thing I could think of is like I said, this is not something that most people desire to get into. So it is kind of weird because it is kind of like, I would like to play someone who went cyber psycho and like their journey there and then their journey back if they make it
Yeah.
kind of right. So I guess the question is, would you consider a cyber psychotic character permanently retired?
A cyberpsychosis character retired? What do you mean?
in other words, if someone went full cyber psycho and either and got caught, let's just say that, right?
Uh-huh.
And they went through the therapy, would you let the player take that character control over again and continue playing whatever they were playing?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. I mean, well, to a certain degree, it defines it, how much you can get back at what levels of therapy and the costs and all that in Red. But most definitely, if they get to that point, and like I said, it's rare that they'll capture you and put you through therapy. Usually, when the GM's in control and you get that low, it's Psycho Squad is out for you, and they're trying to put you down. The crazy animal running around the city. But there is that chance, and who knows? I don't know if you're. It's kind of up to the GM, I guess, at that point, GM discretion. If you're having a good time with that player, they're role playing well, and they went on that journey, and you think, man, like, yeah, let's bring it back. Like, this dude's crazy. He's great at role playing. Like, let's see how he comes back. That could be kind of cool. But there's also, I don't know,
But you would consider that
rare.
a rare unicorn moment.
Oh, totally
Like
rare. Yeah,
such a
yeah.
character would literally be world renowned. Like that guy came back from cyberpsychosis.
Exactly. No, no, it definitely has to be rare. And maybe even if you do kind of want to do it, you should make it a role somehow, like homebrew that shit, just to double layer the chances, on it, as a GM. But again, GMs can do anything they want, and certain things in Cyberpunk and most things in Cyberpunk, as you see, like they kind of write the rules like that. They leave some things open, and they give you a lot of GM discretion, and they try to make it more of an open world, and I love that. But the things that they do define are definitely there, and they're appreciated. And when it comes to cyberpsychosis, at least in Red, they do define all those therapies and stuff. So in my mind, it's still a possibility. You know what I mean? You could come back, but it's rare.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's my point of view is exactly that. Like, I would love. I mean, you would need a really good character. You need a really good player to do this with, and you'd probably have to work out a lot of details behind the screen to play it right.
Yeah.
Um, but I would love to explore a character who went cyber psychotic, and then if he survived the experience and recovered, to be like, okay, you're still a solo. You're just now you can't, you're not gonna have any, the same number of cybernetics you had before. So you're gonna have to live with that limitation, and B, there will have to be. Me personally would think there has to be some permanent consequence to you
Oh
coming
yeah,
back.
no, there would definitely have to be some type of like parole officer situation and like a monthly check-in with a psychologist or something like, mandated by the city, and like, maybe it shows up maybe he has to wear an ankle bracelet for the rest of his life. Like you could have fun with that. You could come up with all kinds of creative ideas, I think. I mean,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and that was just off the top of my head. I'm sure, if you sit down and really think about that, you could really make entire campaigns around that, which would be fun. But again, like I said, it would take a special player because they would have to really be into role playing and know how to, really rock that dynamic, because man, what a journey that would be. But that would be exciting. I think it would just take a really experienced, or I don't know, talented player.
No, absolutely. Not, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I do think that that's probably a very intriguing possibility to explore in a game. And like I said, it's one of the reasons why I love Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
It's something where you can. This is something that I don't see in any other. Very few tabletop. I think probably only two other games that kind of explore this concept in any depth is Call of Cthulhu, because it has insanity mechanics,
Nice.
and Vampire has sort of a similar concept of loss of humanity, where you're taken over as a vampire, and the more evil you do, the more the vampire side consumes you, to the point where you just become like the uncontrollable killer vampire, and you have to be put down.
Yeah. No, that definitely sounds similar. But the one thing I love about it, like even with those, like I was picturing, I was like, oh yeah, it does sound similar. But again, like one thing I love about Cyberpunk is just the realism in it. Like it's there. It definitely mimics exactly how you would picture mental illness happening from going overboard with cybernetics and all that coming into play. But I also think there's just such a human element to it because of Cyberpunk being what it is as a role playing game, that it's just, I don't know, for me anyways, more immersive. And I still love my D&D. I love fantasy stuff and whatever. It's fun for what it is. But to me, I don't know, that's just the dark dystopian future part of Cyberpunk. It is just always to me it's just always, it always has the potential to be dangerous and gritty and crazy. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. But no, I think I think we covered all our bases here. Anybody listening, if you thought of something interesting about cyberpsychosis and your experience with cyberpunk and anything we didn't mention or cover, or you have an opinion, leave it in the comments. Send a message. Join us on Facebook on the Cyberpunk Uncensored group. Hit us up on the YouTube channel. Check out the live gameplay and all the things we do there. The GM tips. One place to kind of go and see everything that we have going on is just go to cyberpunkuncensored.com. And I'll put the links and stuff in the description. And yeah, Hugo, other than always seeing you at the Cyberpunk Uncensored group, do you have anything else you want to plug? Anything online where people can find you?
Nothing right now.
Well,
Yeah,
you're definitely
just
part of the Cyberpunk Uncensored group. You're there. And one thing also, like, just to mention, I'm sure sometime in the future I want to talk to you about joining some of the live gameplay and running some for us for fun, even if not just a one shot. We're kind of getting into, I don't know, expanding the Cyberpunk Uncensored brand online and the game streaming stuff. So
no, no,
I'd love to,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, have
We
you part
talked,
of
we
that.
talked, we talked about it, and yeah, if
Yeah.
you want to look forward to something, I am thinking about running some one shots.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, like I talked to you before, I feel masochistic because I know this is the most controversial part of the rules, but I part of the reason I love Cyberpunk 2020 is the saddest part of Cyberpunk 2020, net running.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
And when I read about net running, I'm like, oh, cool! I love computers and VR, and you could, wow, you could do the Tron thing, and you could jump into the virtual world and do all this. And then, as more and more I read, and more I heard that everyone pretty much like, yeah, it sucks. No one uses it.
Well, yeah, no, let me just add some real quick, and I don't want to get too much into net running. I literally just did a full episode about net running and red and all that with one of my players that plays a net runner in all the games we do. But no, I think it's not that people hated it,
Well, it
or
was,
no,
it was,
I don't think it's that it sucked. I think people just didn't like how crunchy and difficult
and
and
how it took
separate
you
it
out of,
was from
yeah, it just
the
took
rest
you
of
out
the
of the,
team.
yeah, it was super crunchy. It takes you out of the regular game. It's such a separate process, and the way
Right,
I like to describe it as, it's kind of analogous to having a D&D party and having that one guy that has to sit in the other room,
right.
and you have to, as a GM, run back and forth between two different rooms to play two different games. And so that's not fun. That's not immersion. People are going to start checking their phones and ordering pizza, and
Right.
and that's what I mean by people hated it. When people got involved in that, they were like, "Well, it's cool, but it's really kind of like not involving us, so we'd rather just not do it."
No, exactly.
You
Exactly.
know, and it kind of broke my heart because I'm like, "Man, this is what I wanted to do."
Yeah, yeah. But no, definitely. Let's not start getting into a whole tangent on net running.
Oh,
Let's end it on the cyber psychosis. And anybody checking it out, hopefully, like I said, if there's anything that we forgot to mention about cyber psychosis, hit me up, hit us up, leave a comment, join the group, check out the link, check out the website. We'd love to have you as part of Cyberpunk Uncensored, the community that we're building here. We also just launched the Discord. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. Hugo, thanks so much for joining me.
thank you for having me, man. It was a
Oh,
great
yeah.
time.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely do it again. There's so many subjects that need to be covered in Cyberpunk, and like you, I could talk about it all day. So we'll definitely do some more episodes in the future together. I'd love to have you back if you're down with that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, hey, everybody listening, take care. Hugo, take care, and we'll see everybody next time. Take care.
Later, Chumbas.